Hello, everyone, and welcome to Panel to Panel. Sorry about the last minute cancellation last time, but I am glad that we finally had a chance to do this. My name is Brian Keeter. I am the host of the interview podcast RIYL, and I'm joined by Heidi McDonald of The Beat and Anthony Ha of ENIAC Ventures. Wanted to get some of the boring process stuff out of the way up top. We'll be recording and posting the audio from the session for posterity on the RIYL YouTube page. You can listen to anything you missed there. You can also check out past conversations that we have had with Warren Weinstein, Glenn Head, as well as our more recent conversation about indie publishing with Tom Kay and Patrick Crotty. This is our third time using Twitter Spaces, so hopefully we've worked out most of the major kinks here. Like last time, we're going to kick off the conversation with our guests, and then we'll invite listeners to ask questions and join in on the conversation toward the end. All right. With all that in mind, I'm excited to introduce our guests for this month. This time out, we are going to be discussing the state of comics retail and the direct market. Brandon Schatz is the co-owner of the Schuster Award-winning Variant Edition graphic novels and comics in Edmonton, Alberta. In his spare time, he overthinks everything involved in the comics industry while listening to podcasts about how the world is probably doomed. Brian Hibbs has owned and operated Comix experience in San Francisco since 1989. He was a founding member of the board of directors of Comix Pro and sat on the board for the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. He has also been an Eisner Award judge. If you enjoyed today's conversation and would like a bit of a deeper dive, check out Tilting at Windmills and the Indirect Market over at The Beat. Heidi, I'm going to let you kick things off, but first, we got into this a little bit before. I think it's fair to ask, Brian, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm feeling much better. Thank you for asking. I fell down the stairs just before the previous one of these. I fell down a flight of like 10 concrete stairs, and I broke my wrist, and I cracked my head, and my brain was bleeding, and yeah, but I'm doing much better now. I feel like things are healed. I'm a comic book retailer, so we're like a New York sewer rat, and it's just how it is, and we're tough.
Yeah, well, the good news is my understanding is that the rats are thriving in New York City right now, so I think you'll be in good shape. So Heidi, this was kind of your baby, and this all goes back to I think what Brandon had deemed dueling banjo columns that have been running on The Beat for a couple of months now.
Right. Well, yeah, thank you both for coming, Brandon and Brian. And I'm so lucky at The Beat to have two retailer columnists, and both of them are incredibly love to write very long, very articulate columns. So that is truly a blessing, and you're both so good at staking out your viewpoints on all this. And I think you probably have more in common than you have different, although we might find out over the next hour. But Brian, of course, has been writing about the direct market for mumble years. I mean, decades. And chronicling its ups and its downs, its follies, its foibles, and its successes. And Brandon, you just renamed your column The Indirect Market, which I think is a really interesting way of looking at this place that we find ourselves in. And, a lot has changed, a lot is staying the same. And, here we are. But even today, I'm actually going to ask you about today's breaking news, both of you, because it seems like Diamond Comics Distributors, which is, of course, still the biggest distributor of comics, everyone but Marvel and DC, got a ransomware attack. And piled on top of all the other things that are going on, what has that meant for your stores this week?
So I guess I'll take it. So if you tell us who should talk, that'll be easier probably for us to unmute. But I'll take the first round. It made a really uncomfortable weekend where we weren't sure what was going to go on. Like, could we place final order cutoff orders? Were our comics shipped? Can we place reorders, et cetera, et cetera? There were 36 hours or so where Diamond was down, and it was pretty rough. But they came back up, and they were pretty okay about communicating us. That's what I can say.
Yeah, and for me,
Well,
Yeah, I think one concern is Comic Suite because there have been reports that people have been inconsistently able to connect to use Comic Suite or Pullbox, which is the pull system that connects to Comic Suite, and so there are definitely retailers out there who don't have ways to pull in the data without there being a live connection, and the live connection is still a little bit iffy right
Yeah,
now.
and we're just at a midpoint of getting off of that, moving to a new system that is more actually for the book market, but is going to work out pretty well for us going in the future. It's going to be weird and wild, but we'll see.
so that's just today's drama. This week's new trauma. Ransomware is a new one for Diamond, but of course we've seen a whole year of all sorts of change, upheaval, everything, shutdowns, opens up, everything. So let's take you both back to that day. I guess it was April, in early April 2020, when Diamond announced they were shutting down due to the pandemic. And what happened? What happened in your store from that day forward? And Brian, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was scary because so Diamond's shutdown coincided with San Francisco's shutdown. We were told, I want to say within 48 hours of when Diamond said they were shutting down, that we would not be allowed to be open as a business in San Francisco to walk-in customers. And it meant an adjustment to something that was not what we do. It's probably gonna sound stupid, but I think that retailers are not necessarily aware of how much of the work the customer uh, actually does. The customer is the one who walks around the store and looks through the books and pulls them off the shelf and goes, these are the ones that I want. And so to switch that work to having to be us, in addition to all the work that we have to do to run the operation, we found ourselves with probably 4 times as much work for half as much income.
So Brandon, I know you've talked about. I mean, I know a lot of stores had to start websites and started doing online retail. And Brian, did you develop that as you went along, or?
Yeah, no, we had a website up, I want to say within 72 hours, I think, and all thanks to Django Bowrin in Washington, who gave some tools for people who use Mobi to get stuff up on Shopify really fast. He was awesome about that, and it made a huge difference to what our ability to do was. But the thing is that web sales as a physical retail store are are not the same thing as having a physical retail store. They're not the same. And I don't I can get into it more if you want me to, but all I can do is just kind of say that and shut up.
Well, I want to ask Brandon, because I think you said that you had kind of mentally been preparing for this for a long time, maybe. In your last column, you talked about that. But yeah, what happened on that day at your store, Brandon?
So the early stuff is very similar to Brian. By weird fluke or happenstance, uh, the province of Alberta, uh, on the Friday after that Diamond announced their shutdown, which I think was like a Tuesday, like, hey, this week's the last week you're going to get product. Alberta was like, hey, you also non-essential services can't have people in. And that lifted uh, the same week that Diamond announced their comeback, which was very happenstance and good. But for our end too, while we hadn't been preparing for this thing specifically, what we had in place already was a website that had our products on there, and we've been doing in-city delivery for a couple years prior already, starting with low mobility customers, just to make sure that they could get their product. We're not a
a city as large as San Francisco or as wild to navigate as San Francisco. And you know, having that all in place, and the digital and the social media reach already, because we're fairly active about that stuff. Really, when things came to a head, when we're looking at all these articles of like, what can a business do to prepare for this time, it was like, oh well, those boxes are checked, so I mean, I guess we'll continue.
And so yeah, so you guys both survived, you know, this first interregnum, this first shock, and then came all the distribution shocks and changes with DC leaving, and then later Marvel leaving, and you know, it's definitely had its ups and downs. But what have you learned about your core business in the last year? I mean, what surprised you, or was a pleasant surprise, let's say, in the last year and a half of these shocking changes? And you know, Brandon, why don't you go first this time?
Not surprised by a whole lot. Just a lot of people asking questions about like, well, what does this mean? And in Canada, there's a couple different aspects that we have. There's an outfit called Universal up here that is 30 minutes away from where DC has printed a lot of their periodicals, which has been very helpful in terms of getting product. Universal is a wholesaler of DC stuff, basically. I've been pushing DC to be like, so you should make them a full distributor instead of we have to submit our items on Thursday so that they can get them in on Friday, so that Lunar has their stuff together by the Sunday, Monday, basically, when they would send their FOCs in. That sucks a lot. So when everyone's complaining about their final order cutoffs, I'm sitting here just being like, all right, folks, calm down. I understand why it sucks. It does, full stop. We go through Universal because we don't have to pay any duty on any of that stuff coming up here. So it actually makes things extremely more cost effective. We tried to talk to a bunch of stores around here to get them on board as well. For whatever reason, the Edmonton comics market is fun and interesting, and they don't like each other, which is neat. That's another thing entirely. But we had that extra option. They've been incredible. I know a lot of the complaints about Lunar that Universal has actually extended as well, because of a situation that they've worked out with Lunar. It seems as though they are able to pick up the product directly from the warehouse, because we get that stuff incredibly quickly, and because there was a shift in how we got our product when they moved to Lunar from, I want to say UCS, if I'm getting the acronym properly, before they shut down and had to move to Lunar. And their wholesaler also does not care for Lunar, just to put that out there. So things have been better up here in terms of that. Our Marvel stuff took a couple weeks to kind of get in line because that ships from a specific warehouse in the States instead of coming from Penguin like it does in Canada. So we were getting things at like 4:30 on Tuesday night, which is not ideal. That sucked a lot. But we would also have everything else prepped, and so that worked out kind of okay. But now we tend to get things on Monday from Marvel, and Thursday or Friday from Universal. So that's been pretty good. And then Diamond, we've always had a drop point here in Edmonton. We used to have a warehouse here in Edmonton in the long ago, before me times. I've heard a lot of stories from Edmonton retailers, including a dude who would pick up stuff, and because the drop point guy wouldn't get him to sign things, never paid for his stuff, and he was very proud of that. The Edmonton community is wild and weird in terms of that kind of stuff. And long rambling. I've had a bunch of Buckley's cough syrup story short. It's been fine-ish.
I obviously up until fairly recently, Diamond has been not just a monopoly, but really the monopoly in the industry. It looks like things might be changing to a certain degree moving forward, which obviously a lot of people have lauded, based on Diamond's position in the market. Brian, reading through your column, though, I would say that at best you have some misgivings when it comes to them sort of surrounding that place in the market. So quoting from your column, you said, for the record, my first week damage rate from Penguin Rounded House was 8.8%, roughly 9 times higher than what Diamond typically yields for us, and I'm one of the lucky ones. So this was I think from last month. Has anything changed on that front? Are the books still largely coming in damaged?
So it looks like Brian might have popped out.
Switch to listener. There we go.
Yeah.
Let me get it back up.
I will add, our shipments tended to be okay. Part of that, we don't deal with UPS or anybody. We deal with a weird outfit called Canpar up here, and our Canpar guy is exemplary, and so our stuff came in really, really well. But it was an anomaly from what I heard.
Great. Hey, Brian, if you get a chance, can you?
Did we invite?
Yeah, I think 2 of us have. Still working out the kinks after 4 of these things. Brian, might be best to drop and come back on if you can hear us. I hear Heidi typing to you furiously right now.
Okay, all right. And Brian has dropped off, so fingers crossed he'll come back in a second. We'll invite him again.
So as we wait for Brandon, where's your store at right now in terms of distribution? Who is? What's kind of the breakdown right now in terms of distributors?
So we have Universal up here right now, which is getting us our DC product. What's neat is they're also doing Marvel, and they're matching the Penguin model, which means that they're also doing the 50% across the board and free shipping, which Diamond is not doing. Now, Universal, I'm not sure the P's and Q's of all of this. They are more of a gaming distributor that is doing some comic stuff. They seem to be having a fair good time about it. But what this means is, for the first time ever, if there's something wrong with some Marvel product, I have 3 sources to go to. Penguin seems to have a stock on hand, which Diamond never did. Diamond seems to have stock on hand because they're a wholesaler now, and I believe are trying to have stock on hand to be a better, say, partner with the retail stores. So they'd be like, you can source your stuff from us. And then we also have Universal. So Marvel stock traditionally has been impossible to get after they ship, and now is wildly better than ever to just sort of like, I can get that for you. That's going to be no problem.
So wait, Brandon, are you telling me you didn't get boxes of crushed comics like everybody else?
I did not. No, I think part of it is because I talk wrestling with our Canpar guy for like 5 seconds every time he drops things off, and so he makes sure our boxes are really pristine. And also, because it's Canpar, because how it gets to us is different than how it's getting to everyone else in the States, which is different. But yeah, like we have so many options here. Honestly, it's weird because Diamond has been typically really bad for how they get things to us. When we're doing a reorder, it could take anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks to get up here in Canada. That sucks in general. Getting things from book publishers, which we moved to heavily for graphic novel stock, takes in some cases 4 days, which for Canada is wild in terms of comic stores, and at most 2 weeks. And so it's I've been very frustrated with Diamond in general, and part of that does have to do with their focus on the US market. I completely understand why they would do that, because Canada's not really going to do a whole lot for them. But yeah, at the same time, it's weird to say that the shift in markets has been very beneficial to us.
Great. It looks like Brian is back on. So let me ask you again, Brian. So you had gone kind of counter to some of these sort of common wisdom around people generally being excited that Diamond is no longer a monopoly, and part of that was just the kind of your experiences with Penguin Random House. You said your first week damage rate was 8.8%, roughly 9 times higher than what you dealt with Diamonds, and you were one of the lucky ones. So this column was from last month. Has your experience with PRH improved at all?
I think Brian might still
I see him as
be
speaker.
a listener. Oh, I'm seeing him as a listener. Heidi, what
I'm
are you
seeing
seeing?
this.
Oh, well,
Okay.
let me remove him.
Okay. Well, hopefully that we'll get that figured out. Well, one thing maybe while we're working on that, I guess a broader question that I had, Brendan, reading both your column and Brian's column, I think obviously there's like some different perspectives in terms of particularly like the role of like the single issue in the business going forward. But despite those differences, one thing that was really striking to me was that both of you, I think, ended recent columns basically saying, this is a great time for comics as an art form. This is a really bad time to be in the business of selling comics. And it was just, kind of a bleak note for both of you to end on. And Brandon, I'd love to hear from your perspective. I mean, what do you think is, beyond the sort of day-to-day stuff that we've been talking, what do you think is the biggest issue that's causing those difficulties?
So for me personally, in terms of being a comics retailer, a lot of it comes down to what we're all reliant on and the systems that we're reliant on, and how a lot of us seem to insist on trying to maintain and work with the systems that are here instead of trying to build new ones. It's extremely difficult to do comics retail with the systems in place. I extrapolate that, and part of what I've been doing a lot of with the indirect market is sort of talking about how a lot of these comparisons end up working out into the larger world, about how different systems don't seem to be working to be helping people in general instead of people who might already be in positions where they're fine. I see that a lot in the comics industry, where slightly from my own experience and some others, Diamond has been pretty big on, say, helping the folks who have always been there which I understand. You want to help your long-term customers and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of times it always seemed to be sort of like this thing where when a lot of people talk about how Diamond functioned as the comics industry bank for a long time, what I see a lot of is they functioned for the bank for the customers who had made them a lot of money and were fairly large scale customers. So when you win big, you win big. When you lose big, you lose big. And they would function as sort of like the landing pad for a lot of those. But for a lot of smaller customers, they'd be like, well, that's nice that you can't do that. Pay us. That doesn't grow you a customer base. That grows you the customer base that you currently have that might not be evolving. And that's a lot of what I've been seeing. Now I know that has its problems as well in terms of where I'm looking at things. I've come across an idea called the Madman's Box that I learned about on a podcast called Worst Year Ever, and I don't know the book that they're referencing, but it's the idea of, say, you take the information that you have and you apply it to your worldview, and you discard things that don't quite get there. So there's things sort of like how this year a lot of people are saying, wow, the single issues are like on trajectory to blow previous years out of the water. It's going to be fantastic. There's so many sales. You can take that information and look at it two different ways. Yes, that's true. But with all the 1-for-1000s and all these things, yeah, it'll look that way for how things are sold. But there's this reliance here on those sales. You're not growing the market. That could be bad in terms of my Madman's Box. But for someone else, you look at that and go, well, the money there is never going to end. Like, you sell a 1-for-1000, it covers those costs. You sell the 1-for-100s, you sell the 1-for-500s. The money's there. It's working. And wow, what a great time for comics. And you can kind of put that in that box. And so I will admit that my bleak future is based off of, I don't see how even positive numbers that can be out there, given what information I'm getting in, can be seen as purely positive. But you know, I can understand why people might be ecstatic about the future, and I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure Brian sees a lot of the variant stuff as well. I've been reading his columns for way longer than I've been a retailer. And I know that he's maybe not a fan of variants.
Well, we do have Brian back. So, Brian, can you speak?
Don't move from whatever position you're in right now.
Yeah, well, but somebody asked me an actual question because I totally lost the thread of what I was supposed to say.
Brandon wants to know what your thoughts on variants are. You seem to be not necessarily in.
So that's the question. Okay, yeah. So I think that as a general principle, multiple covers for the same comic book are a waste of the consumer's money, and while I get the collector urge, is not something that's useful or practical or something that we should pursue as an industry, right? Like it's wrong that we push this idea that like we should be filling all these orders because we're not selling the right thing anymore. We're not selling the content anymore.
Let me ask the two of you then a big question, because I think this is something that each of you come down on fairly different sides of. And Brian, let's start with you. What is your take on the future of single issues?
Oh, well, I mean, the future of single issues is whatever we choose to make it to be, right? Like, I firmly believe that the consumer prefers the single issue as a format than they do the book. I can see it for title over and over and over and over again, where I'll sell, 10, 20, 15 copies, whatever, of the serialization, and I'll sell 2 copies of the book, right? It's important that people have as many inexpensive accesses and endpoints into a story, and then they'll buy in. And people, I think, actually really enjoy serialization. Did that answer the question?
It did. I mean, just to drill down on it a little bit further, you had a hypothesis in your column that, obviously you invoked Raina, and she's consistently not just a best-selling cartoonist, but just a best-selling author, period. That, perhaps she would sell even more units if she was selling single issues.
Yeah, and I think that's the potential case as well, right? So look, I know that any comic that I've ever sold, including the things that have gone on to be really fantastically successful in book format, say Saga, say Sandman, et cetera, if they're serialized at an inexpensive price, we sell more copies to more human beings by selling it in that format. Yes, you make more money in a sales chart, right, from a book, because you're talking about people spending $20, but in terms of number of people, you're absolutely selling more copies of things that are serialized. It in my experience, and I know some of us are going, some of the audience is probably going, oh, he sounds like an old man. What is he talking about? But literally, this is what people want. People like serialization. They enjoy that, and they enjoy being able to buy comics that way.
All right. And Brandon, sounds like you wouldn't be too disappointed if this marked the death of the single issue.
Yeah, yes, and as my wife would say, classic Brandon response, yes and no. So I am very big on, say, the death of the single issue as a concept. I will also say that in most, if not all instances, unless it's like from very, very early in my career, when I was younger and just sort of like a turd, I would say that I would hasten that with, it's not that I want it to go away. I like the format. I like its delivery. It's what I prefer in terms of how I consume. It's not the most efficient way to deliver information these days. Serialization can occur and has occurred, say, in forms of webtoon, etc. Yes, the format's different. Yes, the pay structure is different. But in terms of, say, when we're talking about how many people are experiencing a concept, so we say, well, so the graphic novel does make more money, like Brian was saying. It makes more money and is coming in, well, maybe not more money in total, but per capita, it's or not per capita, I guess, just per unit. There we go. It can pull in more money in terms of that, but you're not getting that wide range of audience. So what if that audience, say, for like Lore Olympus, is over 5 million in terms of subscribers? Now, subscribers, we know how things work in the comics industry. I would challenge any comic store owner to say that their subscribers read everything that they buy. That's why subscription models exist in digital, in comics even. When we're poo-pooing like, oh, well, the subscriber rate of Webtoon doesn't suggest a readable audience. Yeah, we know that. And I don't understand why people are so upset about it. But it also gives us a metric of the amount of people who care for one reason or another.
Yeah, so let me speak to that, Brandon, because because I this is actually, I think, the heart of our discussion, right? That unless people are spending money in my store cannot be open. And my store is not just me taking care of my family, which would, I think, be, relatively speaking, you and Danica, right? Like, because I've got me and my wife and my son that I'm taking care of, right? uh but it's also all of the employees that I have working for me. And and we have a fantastically expensive rent because we're in San Francisco. uh and we have a minimum wage that is, you know, 16.37 an hour right now, and I pay no one anywhere. I pay everybody way more than that at this point, because you have to, in order to get qualified people who, and have them have a chance to live. But it's not, it's very, 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 very difficult to make money doing that, right?
Oh yeah.
Right, like
I,
that changes the whole thing, man, right?
well, I would agree to a lot of what you're saying, and also commend you on paying more than the minimum wage there, because that's a hell of a thing, especially from my understanding of a lot of American markets where like minimum wages not 16.70 or sorry, my brain fuzzed out on the exact amount that you said there, but yeah, and I understand too, like if the serialization is not happening, that's not monetizing in store, that sucks, full stop. I also look at it too as I'm not paying that money, and a little bit of that does come from the pandemic era. The almost to the second that the store started wildly accruing money was when Diamond stopped sending single issues. We order pretty tight in general.
I mean, super awesome, bro. Super awesome. Super awesome. Super awesome. That is so super awesome. And yet that's not the experience of so many people.
Yeah, no,
right?
I get that. And I'm not discounting that, you know, it's not gonna suck a lot for a lot of people. Like my goodness, if this actually happened and Marvel and DC and well, let's face it, they're the corporate ones. There that could come up from up high of just like, we make, you know, a a nothing on this in terms of single issues in comparison to like what our companies are, our parent companies are worth. Why do we produce this? Let's do X, Y, or Z.
No, hold on. See, this is where, this is the place that we disagree, right? Because in the world that I live in, the serialization is what amortizes the cost of creation and publication so that you can put out the book.
Oh, yeah.
For Marvel and DC, 99% of, not 99, that's way too much. Let's say 80% of what Marvel and DC publish as comics, well, 100% they put into books. It at best 80% is what sells, and only 20% sells well enough for us to even give a damn about. 80% of Marvel and DC's graphic novels that come out sell like garbage shit. We sell one copy, we might reorder a second copy, and then nobody ever cares ever again. And I'm a bookstore, and I've been a bookstore for 20 years, really, for God's sake. You know, the math doesn't work on that, right? And the whole point of the serialization is that we're amortizing the costs over that publication. It makes it so that creators can actually make a living wage. Most creators who do original graphic novels can't possibly make any money. I've talked to dozens, scores of them who, in terms of like what their advance is, when you look at it on an hourly basis, they're making less than minimum wage, far less than minimum wage. Sorry, I'm babbling again.
I completely understand where you're coming from. You know, and there's a lot of people in comics, in the larger scheme of things, when we talk about sort of like how how the sausage is made, like, yeah, it's not, even the most popular webtoons creator is not making their living wage a lot of times. Now, a lot of them definitely are.
Yeah, but hold on, wait. Let's back up even a step. It's not just that they're not making a living wage. There are the majority of people who are working on webtoons make $0. The overwhelming majority of people make $0. And this is true on any internet media platform. Listen, I have this graphic novel of the month club. We interview people. Our interviews are really fucking awesome. We're quote unquote monetized by YouTube. I haven't hit their threshold yet where they've given us a check yet. And I have actually real good content. So no, this is not a thing that that is a real way for people to make money, except for the rare people who luck into the lottery. And if you want to argue a system based on the lottery, I can't even, man. I can't even. Heidi or Brian asked a question, okay? Hold on.
I am going to
jump
in here for a moment, and he's on. Just, it's all good. It's okay. And I will say we are going to take questions to the audience. So I believe you do that by raising your hand. So if you have a question. So, I mean, I will say I edit both Brian and Brandon, and Brian and I often have a lively conversation in our emails back and forth about stuff like this. And,
Yar!
And he, listen, to quote Dan DiDio, Brian is a pamphlet man, so, but I mean, Brian, I will say, not everybody who makes monthly comics all the time makes a living off.
And that's what
I mean, most of them too. For Marvel and DC. Oh, the people who work for Marvel and DC do, but a lot of the people who work for Image don't. A lot of people who work for IDW,
and a lot of the people who
all these other publishers don't make a living doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's no doubt that is the case. And if you're not making money, you shouldn't be doing it. But the math of the business is there. If you can serialize a book and at least break even on the publication of the book, then you will make a ton of money once it becomes a graphic novel at that point.
So what?
Right?
So wait. But all right, Brian. I will ask you this. I've always wanted to. So if that is true, why doesn't Random House and Scholastic? Why don't they do it? They want to make money.
I mean, I would ask the same fucking question. Why don't they serialize novels?
So I
right? Like,
in a way,
I don't know why. Because to me, as a person who sells serializations as a primary thing that we do, not the sole thing, of course, but I don't understand why they don't understand this business.
Let Brandon jump in there.
Yeah. So here's. I worked in the book industry for a while as well to kind of supplement my comic stuff, and I was a kid in the prime Goosebumps, Animorphs, etc. era. There was monthly serialization of stories. Now they stopped doing that, and I know Scholastic and all of them, they probably have a good reason. It's the same. It's the same to the point of like freaking. All of those pulp novels that would come out monthly and all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to remember the names of even the ones that still came out on a quarterly basis. I want to say Matt Gargan, but that's the freaking.
But that's not what we're talking about, man. I mean, let's don't make false equivalencies. It's not the same fucking thing. There are thousands of people right now. Heidi, you can back me up on this. There are thousands of people right now who are making a wage doing periodical comics. This second,
I wouldn't say there was thousands. I got to be honest. I would say there's hundreds, a few hundred, but it's
cool.
Okay, it's not thousands.
Well, and this goes to.
I mean, how many comics Marvel and DC publish? Marvel and DC are publishing just between those two publishers.
Guys, you're talking over
200 comics anyway.
Like how many people are making money doing books either? They're not. Like, let's be honest. We're not talking about mediums like the prose publishing business, the comics industry. We're not talking about businesses where I'll agree with you, Brian. We're not making money. We're not in the right business to make money. I get where you're coming from. At the same time, I think it's silly to look at the volume of what the companies are looking for, especially like Marvel and DC. It would be nothing to them, their parent companies, to stop doing it. It really wouldn't. And to put that efforts into some sort of online thing, I don't necessarily think it would be a great idea. I agree.
Yeah, no. But so Brandon, so I don't disagree with you. You just said a thing, and you've said it a couple times. We don't make money. We don't make money off comics anymore. Nobody makes money off periodical comics anymore. The math of the basic premise of sell the serialization, amortize your costs, then when you get to the book, the book is pure profit, is the sound and rational way to go. And anybody who's smart does it that way. But you're right that certainly most of it doesn't sell anymore, and most of it we don't do anymore. And so go on. I'm sorry.
So here's the depressing thing that I've come across. And it sucks, and we will almost definitely agree with this. Because of that, because it is hard to make money off of this, I would love to be able to sell that single issue with that one cover. My God, would it simplify my life to just put it in the hands of people and be like, hey, here's this thing that you're going to love, that you're going to consume and enjoy and come back next month. My goodness. These companies know what we know, that there's not money in this. But because of that, that's why we have this ridiculous market where it's the 1 for 1,000. And so it puts, as a lot of it does, puts the burden on us to like, oh, well, I know this sucker who will buy that. Now, I don't go out looking for those people. I don't care about any of that. But I understand that that's a driving portion of this business. And unfortunately, it's what's
but it should be none of the business. It literally should be none of the business. It should be none of the business. We should not do that. We should not do that. That is the way that leads us to doom and horror, and there is no way out. Yeah, I mean, yes, we're very close to that, but we can still get out of this black hole, right? We're at the lip. I'm not a science fiction guy, so I can't quite get it. We're at the lip of the black hole. We're all gonna fall in and die, but we don't. Thank you. But we're not gonna do it unless we're stupid, right? We can get out of this still, and it's up to every retailer to step forward and to have the business that you want to have, right? And this is where, Brandon, I think you and I agree 100%. Yeah. You should have the business that you want to have. The mechanisms that we have depended on for many years are not viable anymore because the publishers have done horribly screwed up things and made it not viable anymore.
I will say it's 50-50. They tried it, and the vast majority of retailers agreed with it.
So just to jump in with a quick reminder that if you guys have questions, and I think there are some listeners here who probably have a lot of expertise on this, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call you up and you can ask a question. And maybe to kind of comment this from a slightly different tack, it sounds like we were starting to get to some points of agreement, and as we think about, I guess, the single issue, not as good or bad, but it seems like we agree on a lot of where the shortcomings are. How would you like to see publishers and retailers change their approach to the single issue so it could sort of live up to the promise that maybe Hibbs was talking about in terms of really like reaching new readers, reaching a broader audience, and not just be this sort of collectible that no one's actually reading? Maybe Hibbs, you could start with that.
Yeah.
Or Brandon, you seem like you have an idea.
Oh, well, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm happy to talk about this. So to me, retailers need to do the right thing. Retailers need to order comics based upon what the actual demand is, and not put their dollars forward for publishers who are not supporting them. When I look at the way that Marvel and DC publish, they're predatory publishers. That the things that they do are destructive to the way that we're supposed to order, right? So that there are too many. There was a week, I think 2 weeks ago, that we had to order, like, I don't know, 19 or 20 Batman comics in a single week. Like, how could we possibly sell that to people who want it when there's that many? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. And you're not wrong about that. Like, when we're talking about aspirational, so my aspirational, I believe, really lines up with your aspirational, Brian. It would be the idea that we have this story. As retailers, ideally, I would say, we've been able to experience the story. And when we do that, we don't share it with everybody, because we get that little bit of a rub on the internet, and get to spoil the thing, you know? But we get to say, order the thing and know that, hey, you know what? You, the person that frequents the store, you're going to enjoy this. You, the new person who's coming to the store, you know what? You've told me your likes, your dislikes. I've got this perfect thing for you. My goodness, it's going to change your world. That is the ideal. My God, do we not live in that world, and I hate it.
Right. No, and I do as well. That's literally my point, actually. We used to live in that world, and it's a world that's trivial for us to have if publishers publish responsibly, right? It's critical that there are no more than, I don't know, I don't even want to put a number on it, but there's no more than, let's say, 3 Batman comics in a week. That's actually a critical thing about how a market functions. There are not consumers who want to spend $25 on Batman comics, right? But there are consumers who will spend $900 on Batman comics if that's what the Batman comics this week are, if they have OCD, right? And the big problem to me is that Marvel and DC seem like all of their publishing efforts are aimed at people with OCD, people with fear of missing out, FOMO. It's wrong. It's not the way we're supposed to publish. We're going to drown on this. It's not sustainable, and it's not a thing. And I get why they're doing it, because the internet has allowed these apps to flourish that goes, oh, here are the things that are popular and hot, new issue, new character, blah, 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 blah. But if none of it's sustainable, and the base level of sales are dropping, unfortunately. I'm sorry, I went too long again.
No, you got it.
Well, we have. I'd like to see if we don't have any questions, but I'm trying to see if I can get John Jackson Miller, who was out there listening. I'm trying to see if I can get him, invite him to speak. I'm not sure he's on a mobile phone though, so let me see if John is able to join us.
I love JJ. JJ's the boss.
We all love him.
And for everybody else, if you just hit request to speak when if you do have any questions. I'm just going to try to get John up. Brian, I what I wanted to ask you earlier, when you dropped, unfortunately, you had highlighted some of your unfortunate experiences with PRH with your first shipment, and I know that was from a column from last month, and I'm just curious whether that's changed, or at least things are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, no. The first 2 weeks, 3 weeks of PRH were a horror show, and they fixed all the problems, as far as I can tell. For me, at least, I've had 3 in a row which are perfect. They're not perfect. There's one book, there's this, that, but it's normal, in other words, right? And so, yeah, no, I think they've figured out what the issues are, and they're working on it because they're a professional company.
Agreed 100%.
Well, that's
like PRH, the first batches, I was lucky, full stop. Very few damages. The damages that I'm getting are down to Marvel and how they decided to produce their comics, which are just bad across the board.
They suck.
100%.
So is that has that at all sort of changed? I know you had kind of voiced as a lot of people obviously out there are excited for the hypothetically Diamond to be less of a monopoly than it was in the past. And my understanding of reading your columns, Brian, was that your initial pushback on that was that companies like Penguin Random House just don't know how to handle comics in the way that Diamond has been doing for decades now. Has this kind of changed your stance on that at all?
I don't know, man. I think that Penguin Random House does not give a shit about periodicals at all. They think they can make money from it, and so they're pursuing that money, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, right? But I don't think that it's going to do anything to actually move comics forward. And that to me is what the problem is. We can ask me another question on that, and maybe we can get further in.
I will say, in terms of Penguin Random House, what I'm seeing from their distribution thing is not that they think they can make money off of distributing single issues. I don't think anybody in this business today says they're making money off of single issues, including Lunar. They've been fairly active since day one about like, oh, wow, no, we don't make money distributing. What they're looking at basically is, in terms of Lunar, it's base. It's sort of like a weird assurance that they have product. And especially in terms of like this.
What are you fucking talking about? What are you talking about, dude?
In terms of DC too.
What are you talking about? Lunar is DCBS. Lunar is the number one retailer of comics.
You. That's why there's not comics available after FOC. Full stop. I agree on that point for sure, that it's not entirely altruistic. It's what the public statement is, but in terms of distribution, it doesn't make them money. In terms of their extra stuff, I would question.
Of course it does. Are you insane? Dude, Brendan, are you insane? They're the only one making money from DC Comics right now.
No.
None of us can make any money from DC Comics because DC Comics is now effectively a 50% discount. Right? Like it's not they're making a lot more money than any of us are from DC Comics.
Just distributing single issues, I would no.
They're making a lot more money than any of us are because they were doing that same thing and sending those. They were sending single copies out to individual readers, right?
Yeah.
And now they're sending 20 copies out to 1/1000th of the number of customers. It's so much easier based on their business model. They're making more money than any of the rest of us, my friend.
It's dumb capitalism stuff. Like the one company doesn't, the other company does. I completely understand that. Just the way that it's that it's marketed, etc.
Yes, we're the companies that don't, though. That's my thing. We
agree.
are the companies that don't. Individual retailers have been lost in this. And the whole point of the direct market was that we, as the specialists, the ones who had the knowledge, the ones who had the ability, the ones who had the to be able to move the needle, and which I will say, my friend, right now, I can still move that needle on a book if I believe in it right now, anytime, and you can too. And so we were the ones who were supposed to reap the quote unquote the gains, right? Like we're not we're selling comics for a living. There's no money to be made selling comics for a living, but you know, we the whole point was that we would get a better discount than people who didn't. That was what the direct market is about. That is the fundamental premise of the direct market. And Marvel and DC have decided to go, yeah, who cares?
And I'll agree in a lot of ways there. Like I said,
you better agree in all the ways, boy.
So, all right, so.
No, I do want to get to the end of this part here, which is like, go lunar stuff. I can contend that, of course, like it's shady as hell. In terms of Penguin Random House, like how the free shipping and all of this is hitting their margins that they would like, but what it does do for them is ensure, because they know. Like we know, like you said, the single issues are still, to the way that the market exists, imperative to getting the graphic novel out. And the graphic novels are where they are making their money.
Exactly. But they can't make the money without selling those periodicals. So X-Men sells, I don't know, 80,000 copies, let's say. Amazing Spider-Man sells 60,000 copies of every issue every month. That pays the cost so that when the book comes out, the book is fucking free. The book costs nothing for them to publish. It's free money. The problem is, and this is the quintessential fucking problem with Marvel Comics, the publisher, is they don't understand the lever they have there, and they don't really care. Most of their actually good selling books are out of print at any given moment because they're goddamn idiots about how to print a fucking comic book, and it's all free money. And you know what? Like Amazing Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and X-Men, like the first 20 issues of all of those original Marvel comics are not in print 100% of the time. Can you imagine? I'm just saying to the audience out there, can you imagine that your actual building blocks, the things that actually made your company what it is, just happen not to be in print? And not because it costs a lot of money, because they've got to pay, like, you know, Stan and Jack's hairs like a whole bunch of money to reprint that, but just because they can't fucking be arsed.
Yeah,
So anyway,
in some ways, I think that would be a good note to end on. But I do want to give Brandon and Brian a chance to offer any sort of final thoughts before we wrap up here. Brandon, do you want to go first?
Of course. So I think, Brian, our common enemy here is just sort of how certain parties take advantage of capitalism. That's kind of the wild broad thing here is there's always going to be some parties that take advantage, and my goodness, are a lot of our peers lemmings. I would love to say way better things about it. The folks who are engaged, who, my goodness, are fighting, are clawing, are trying to do everything they can. Fight, my goodness, do it, of course. But just in passive terms, there's so many people who will just do it, who will go along with what's being published, how it's being published. And that's our problem. It's the system that we're dealing with. It sucks. I hate it. when I say the things, I'm not saying that I don't want it to be better. I'm saying that's what's going to happen, and it sucks. I don't like it. And that's
Yeah, and yet, our jobs as moral people who run businesses, who control the levers of power, we literally control what sells in our stores and what doesn't. And so, therefore, our job is to make it better. That's our job. That's the entirety of our job, is to make it fucking better.
I will.
That's what I think, at least.
I will claw to my death to push for better, to do better. I'm the freaking business district chair because I'm trying to do the same thing for our area. Like, you push and you claw and you do what you can. My influence at the end of the day is going to be so much. Yours as well. I know that you have an my God, no. You have a genuine size but great influence on the industry. And we are...
I'm exactly like you, Brandon. There is literally no fucking difference between my store and your store, Brandon.
We are two people,
and if you think that there is, you're wrong.
People.
Because there's not a difference between... No, listen, man. Anybody who has an individual store is the same as every other person who has a store, because that's what stores are. That's what a small business is. We're not a big business. We're never gonna be a big business. As a small business, this is what we are.
I am going to jump in here just a little bit and say there is a difference in that Brandon is in Canada, Brian's in the United States, but I think we could go on.
Hells yeah.
We could go on with this a long time. I did try to invite John Jackson Miller, who runs the Comicron.com site with all sorts of statistics about the industry, to join us, but Twitter thwarted him. He did. I do just want to read a couple things, though, that he did say. We've been texting back and forth. He did point out that periodicals made $400 million this year, so that's pretty good. They've had a very, very good year. But a lot of it is because of collectibles, which neither of you do. So that's interesting. And then he said, Brian is right about.
Yeah. So hold on. Let me just. Okay. All right.
Let me just finish from John Jackson. Just say Brian is right about the creation of books being amortized. Brandon is right about graphic novels being easier to attract new readers with. So, I think that's a fair way of stating it. So.
Yeah, no, 100%. But what I'll say is that even as I think firmly, I'm a bookstore. I'm not a comic book store in the way that when you look at what is a comic book store, I am not a comic book store. Someone came in here, I'm not that kind of a store. We're a bookstore. And yet, 40% of my dollars come from periodical comics. 60% come from books, but 40% come from periodical comics, and it's mostly subs. It's almost exclusively subs. We pretty much don't rack comics anymore.
All right, folks. We are over time, which is great. This has been a very informative and lively discussion. Thanks everyone so much for joining us. Thanks especially to Brian and Brandon. If you are in the San Francisco or Edmonton area, please check out their stores or patronize them online at variantedmonton.com and Comix with an X experience.com. And of course, this conversation will continue for the foreseeable future over on The Beat. Check out their respective columns tilting at windmills and the indirect market over at Heidi's site, The Beat. As I mentioned at the top, we are going to be saving this conversation for posterity and hosting it up over on YouTube. We'll send out a link when that's live. Brian and Brandon, thanks so much for joining us. Everyone else, thanks so much for tuning in.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brian and Brandon.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody. Very quick before the end, Brian actually called when his column moved to Comix Beat to make sure that I would keep writing mine as well, and I appreciate that. And I'm ever grateful for his body of work and everything.
Thank you, Brandon, very much. There's no fucking competition.
Absolutely.
We're all retailers. there's no difference between you and me. I keep trying to tell people this. There's no difference between you and Phil Boyle or Joe Field or any of the names of comics. We're all the same. Love you all.
All right, that's about as positive as a note as I think we're going to be able to end it on. Thanks everyone so much for joining us, and we will catch you
Thanks,
next time.
everybody.
Panel to panel.
Thank you. Bye.